Okay, everyone, we are going to go ahead and get started right on time. That's our hope for today. Just have to get my screens all set up. Something's weird happening here. Let's see. Okay, now I think everybody can see what we need to see. Give me a thumbs up in the chat if that looks right to you. If you can see the full screen and then I'm not blocking anything, because that has a tendency to happen sometimes. Okay, awesome. Thanks, Bree. Okay, so I'm excited about today. It's an ethics CEU, so woohoo! And thank you also, every single one of you, for bearing with the reschedule on this one. I'll just share kind of a vulnerable thing. I am from Texas. I grew up for 13 summers attending Camp Mystic as both a camper and a counselor. And other than just a counselor, I was a camp shopper. I was the inspection lady. I did quite a few things there. So it's my home away from home. And I have several friends and co-counselors and former campers and just people who are part of my Mystic family who lost their daughters and who are still missing their daughters. Or daughter. So I appreciate your patience with me as I spent some time in Texas with my Mystic family and my friends. So I appreciate y'all very much. It's kind of it's shifted a little bit of what I do. It's also, I think, just definitely impacted my summer, to say the least. So thank y'all very much. But without further ado, we're going to do our step 7 today. And this is going to be again thank you, Bree. I appreciate it. This is again an ethics CEU, but aligned with acceptance and commitment therapy. So, how does ACT and our code of ethics align with one another, or how can we implement ACT ethically? Because I think that's often something that comes up whenever we speak about ACT, which is like, well, this isn't in our scope of practice. It's not ethical for us to do this. We shouldn't be doing this with learners, yada, yada, yada. And I agree to some extent. And this is one of the things that we've been talking about for the past 6 months and now 7 months, which is you can't implement this with somebody else unless you're practicing it yourself. So here we are learning together in this community of shared values. So thank you. Thanks for spending your afternoon with me. I appreciate it. And again, thank you, Rama. I appreciate you. So today's objectives, we are going to review the code. And we're not really going to go in depth with the code. And the reason I say this is because I feel like we've beaten that horse, if you will. But we're going to see about just a brief alignment of how ACT aligns with the Code of Ethics. And then we're really going to explore what's the difference between values and morals. How does this come about whenever we're talking about the concept within our code of do no harm? What are our actions that we can engage in that are ethical? So, engaging in what I would consider a true risk benefit analysis, because we're going to do this from our own perspectives first, and then doing our takeaway assignment, which will be our bias assessment. Okay, any questions before we get started? Okay, cool. And as always, oh, I didn't share this at the very beginning. So if you are looking for CEU credit, which who isn't, this is an ethics CEU, please make sure that you email ace@acrossenvironments.com your BCBA number, as well as one takeaway from today's event, and you'll receive your certificate. Please allow about 2 weeks to finish that up. If you haven't received a certificate of completion, please let me know. Email me and we can get that taken care of right away for any of the past certificates or events, or if you need one and you feel like you haven't gotten one for this one coming up, just let me know. Reach out. I'm always available most of the time. Okay, so we understand this. Responsibility is this word that is a theme throughout our code. And this is really taken from the first little bit of our code of ethics. We have a responsibility as professionals in practice to our stakeholders and clients with what we say, and with research. So we, this is a lot. Most professionals do not have this type of responsibility, and it's quite a bit. So when we think about this, like this is our own behavior, and if we're supervisors, that also encompasses our supervisees' behaviors. It includes what we're doing in treatment and practice, what we're recommending to caregivers, how we're assessing, how we are addressing these behavioral needs. We're responsible for that, not the board. They don't take any responsibility for it. Your past supervisor doesn't take any responsibility for it. And ultimately, your company doesn't take any responsibility for it. So this is something to be thinking about. The university that you might be doing with research within technically does, but at the same time could pass that buck off to you pretty well, pretty easily, in all honesty, when it comes to ethic violations. So it is your responsibility to act in these manners that are not only in the best interest of our learners, but also in the best interest of the community in general, so that what we're doing is promoting ultimate best practices and not, ooh, not that kind of ABA, right? Our hope is that nobody's practicing that kind of ABA, but at the end of the day, if it's still there, then we still are responsible professionally to help change that rhetoric. Okay, let's do a quick review. And again, when I say quick review, I mean really quick. So, one of the things that we were talking about, we're going to skip 1.06 because we know that. That's what we're doing right now. But 1.07, cultural responsiveness and diversity. Y'all, this was one of the things that was added in 2020. And it wasn't actually, it was in the year before, but it was modified in 2020. And the reason that it was it's pretty obvious. We had a paradigm shift within our culture. We're further behind now than we were pre-2020, in my opinion. Notice how I said in my opinion. So let's read this. Behavior analysts actively engage in professional development activities to acquire knowledge and skills related to cultural responsiveness and diversity. This isn't in our code anymore. This is no longer one of the things that is talked about within our code because of US federal funding. Now, how does that impact us globally? We've a few people in our audience, right, who are not US citizens, who do not practice in the United States. And yet we have now 1.07 where it's not actually truly a part of our code. Is that something that we should talk about further? I think so. Do I believe that we're living within a little bit of fear? Yeah, I truly believe so. Do I understand why? 100%. And if you don't understand why, and why we had to look at the global, and I say we as a collective society as behavior analysts, why we had to look at this global impact when we're considering harm and doing a risk-benefit analysis, here's the global impact. If US insurance companies stop funding because of something like this, it impacts services not only in the US, but then how they're disseminated in other countries and how they're practiced in other countries and how they're funded in other countries. So, dang it, that's why. So, I want us to think about this when we're going through this, with recognizing like morally, we're here in this shared space, in this audience together, and we very much understand that cultural responsiveness and diversity is critical to what we do. because morally, that's how we practice. And we're going to talk about the difference between morals and ethics here in just a second, but I'm setting it up for that, just so you'll know. Any questions, comments, or feedback about 1.07 in particular before we move on to the next ones? It sucks. It sucks sometimes to think about, like, when we think about do no harm, how much we have to look at that impact. Does that change how you and I practice? No. Will it change how some other people who do that kind of ABA practice? Maybe. But we can't control that. We can only disseminate. And that's what we're here doing today. So now let's move on. So when we look at non-discrimination, this is still a federal law, y'all. So let's hold on to this one. Non-harassment, some of these things, again, do align with what we would consider a moral code of compass, right? Completely within that alignment. 1.10, this is still in there. Awareness of personal biases and challenges. Y'all, this is Skinnerian. And we've talked about this before when we did our self as context step. And that is that we do have to be aware of how challenges have impacted our lives because those experiences have shaped our behaviors over time, right? So we have to understand that as behavior analysts, and I'm going to die on this hill, every single one of us got into this field because at some point in time we needed control of our environment or we had lost control of our environment. And the simplicity of changing and manipulating our own environments contacted reinforcement, like we were able to contact reinforcement for that behavior of changing the environment, right? That's why. So here we are, basically like preachers, Southern Baptist preachers at our pulpits on Sunday mornings, talking about this is what you should be doing. You simply need to change this. But what we aren't recognizing is that Southern Baptist preacher has a whole other learning history than you or I. Every single one of us, yeah, we have this shared thought, the shared idea, but it's not the shared experience of the same learning history. And I know that even though we do have some shared experiences, like this one right here, we might have some shared inner behavior, we still don't have the same learning history. I'm 42 years old, and this was the first time that most of y'all knew that I'm even from Texas, much less that I went to Camp Mystic. And so I understand as I say that, that from my awareness, there's a reason why I haven't said that to many people, and it's because it's rooted in privilege. It is a privilege to be a white girl from Texas who attended a camp in Texas, a private camp in Texas. I get it. So there's a reason. I'm aware of that. I'm also aware of the fact that because of who I am and who I was born as, that I inherently have a different learning experience than my husband, than my clients, than my families, than the people that I walk and encounter and engage with on a daily basis. So we all have these different things that have brought us to where we are here in this moment. And we have to be aware of that because we also then have to understand that with that other person's learning history, they're also bringing with them their own backpack full of stuff. And we can't then unload our backpacks onto them and expect understanding in return, right? But that's often what we do as behavior analysts, which we call it buy-in, and it's not. You're just unloading your backpack onto that caregiver or to that person You're not helping the client. You're telling them this is how I would do it based on what I know of behavior analysis, not taking into consideration what they know and how the behavior analysis application can be within their lives versus within your life. So that's why acceptance and commitment therapy helps us because this is now helping us with our own personal shifts and acceptance of recognizing our bias and how our challenges that we're carrying with us, we often project onto other people. So when we go through this type of psychological flexibility shift, it helps us with our self-awareness because we're able to look at this past of ourselves and not from a lens of judgment, but from a lens of like, ooh, I'm aware that that's there. And now, because I have a strong sense of what I value, because I've already done that CEU, I've got a strong sense of what I value. Now, what I can do is I can align my behavior on a daily basis, because it's a daily practice, to account for these personal biases and my learning history. Okay. Any questions about that before we move on? Cool. We're going to talk about 2.15 here in a second. That's why I'm not really talking about it. Um, minimizing risk. So we're going to talk about that in a second. Okay, cool. So again, this is when we're talking about with the cultural bias. So we're taking another person's perspective. This seems mentalistic to many people. How, though, does assessing your own bias and learning history then eliminate this kind of projection then toward your clients and your families and the stakeholders? Does that then eliminate the need to worry about buy-in? It does, because here's what you're doing. You're automatically embedding social validity within your treatment planning when you're doing this process. So we have to understand that when we're building in like this kind of like social validity idea, which we have to do within our programming, we should start with ourselves and ask yourself, is this truly something that works for this family? Or am I saying that it's socially valid because I perceive it as socially valid within what I consider this social construct? And have I actually assessed what the family's social construct is? Done some deep diving observations, really interviewed the caregivers to figure out what's going on. And then you don't have to go too far, but you can get a little bit more of their history and understanding of how you can work with what their learning history is based on what you know about them and what you've observed. And then from there, develop something that's truly socially valid for that construct, not your own. So this can seem kind of daunting to do because caregivers often like to just talk about their child, right? Not talk about themselves because they're not the problem, their child's the problem. Whole other story. We're all guilty of this. I say this as a parent. So sometimes it is important to just say, where are you from? Are you from, I'm in Colorado. Are you from Colorado? Oh, cool. Oh, amazing. Make this kind of connection. You're from Wisconsin. Awesome. I know nothing about Wisconsin. Like that can be the connection. So you're essentially just kind of like opening it up to more for them to give you more information, right? Did you grow up in a large family or a small family? Opening it up again, right? You're not leaving it to yes and no questions. You're really trying to get some sort of understanding of where they might be coming from. What's in their backpack that you need to look at so that you can have a better picture of what's going to work for them. Cool. Okay, y'all. Second part of our objectives for today. What's the difference? What's the difference between morals and ethics? Well, morals are stagnant, if you will. Those typically don't change. That's why it says morals are absolute. Whereas values can shift, they're shapeable, and they're shaped by our environments, our learning histories. What's contacted reinforcement over time? That's part of what we value, right? But our morals don't necessarily change to that degree. They're pretty solid. We often think that good or bad morals lead to good or bad decisions. We think the same thing about values. We have a tendency, though, to forget that when we put this black and white binary thinking across what's good or what's bad or what a behavior is, that we're actually projecting based on what our personal experience is with that behavior. Stephen Hayes talks about this often about how we categorize emotions as good or bad. They aren't. They're literally just things. They're things that are signals to us, right? They're stimuli. So they're not good or bad. It's only over conditioning that we've made them good or bad. So that's really behavior analytic when we look at this, truly like inner behavior. My son's upset that he's having to do a math page. So if you hear yelling in the background, that's what it is. He's working on diffusion himself. It's fun. It's fun times. It's also summer, so I get it. He's got 2 more weeks before school starts, but sorry, dude. Okay. My husband's here to help him. It's fine. So let's look back at that part of the code about harm, doing no harm. Well, we often talk about how harm affects us personally, and that's usually the risk-benefit analysis that we usually do without recognizing it, because again, we're looking at our own personal construct, not the learner's construct. So we're not always looking about how that harm is truly affecting them, or is it harmful to them? So we can look at how this might be harmful to stakeholders. So this is part of the risk benefit analysis that we never do, because instead we just try to push the intervention onto the stakeholder, right? Well, this is what you should do because this is what the science says. This is what behavior analysis says. This is what best practice says. This is evidence-based practice. Everything else isn't. We're potentially setting our stakeholders up for harm or to do harm. And I'm going to give you an example because this is actually something that's come up several times where I have been working with a caregiver who said that, well, the previous BCBA told me that I needed to just stand there and take it whenever my child starts hitting, kicking, or punching me. What should I do? And I said, move out of the way. So I'm worried that we are trying to teach our caregivers how to take abuse and to live in an abusive relationship. And that's harm, right? We don't need to teach our caregivers how to go through an extinction burst necessarily. We can teach them how to prevent one, and that might be reducing harm within that home, right? So let's be mindful of what we're teaching caregivers to do and recognizing that the strategies that work in an ABA session conducted by a registered behavior technician or a BCBA are going to be different than the relationship that a caregiver and a child have together. And then we can also look, of course, at the greater community. How is it affected? And I'm going to be real. I look at this from a safety lens more than I look at anything else. So the learner within the environment, within the larger community, how are we going to be able to mitigate risk and harm within the greater community? Because that's how that reciprocation happens, right? Where the community might be harmed or the community might be supportive, right, for our learners. And then are we simply rationalizing these interventions because this is all we know and we are kind of scared to seek out extra information that we need to learn something new or to try something new? Or because the behavior of asking some of these questions, like where are you from? What were you from a large family or a small family? Were typically punished in the past by a previous supervisor. And we were told, no, we can't ask those types of questions because that's going to lead to a dual relationship. Y'all, it's okay to have the relationship of being human. And also, we can talk about this in our code, but we didn't. The dual relationship isn't something that should never happen. It's something that we need to make sure is not exploitative and that it's not something that is going to cause harm. So that's not saying I'm not going to ask somebody how they're doing. Um, We think about this too whenever we're looking at like cultural bias. It is incredibly rude to walk into somebody's home and that person offers you a homemade treat or meal or something and to not accept it. And that causes harm to the relationship, right? And I know that's long and outdated from our code, right? Now we know that we can accept those things because they're under $10, right? We know that we can do those types of things. We can accept the thank you note from our caregivers. We can accept the homemade bracelet from our learners and wear it with pride. And that's okay, right? It's okay for us to accept these things and now move into what we would consider values-based behavior, right? So, what decisions or choices led to that harm? Sometimes it's the rationalizing that this is going to be an appropriate intervention for a learner when the reality is that it's not at all for that family. It's only for what you would consider appropriate. So make sure that you're not trying to rationalize the benefit to outweigh the risk. We do this often. I've done this. I've made this mistake myself. We all have. We've jumped to punishment because we said, no, nothing else worked. But the reality is that we didn't actually exhaust all of the other options. Or maybe we actually weren't using the correct application of punishment as it's defined. That also happens often, right? Okay, so what are some things that we can do? This is our third learning objective for today. Well, we can engage in ethical actions and we can assess those ethical actions. We can assess our personal bias. We can assess our cultural history. We can assess how our relationship with the caregiver and the learner, the stakeholders are. So these are important things to assess on a regular basis with each of your learners. I personally love the self-assessment that we have in Reframe. I made it along with some help from some others and some colleagues. But I do find that it's very helpful. It can be kind of triggering, so just be aware of that. Skip some of those questions that might be kind of triggering with you, or work through these with a therapist or mental health professional, because sometimes some things might come up, and that happens. You can also then ask those questions of your learners' families. How is that different than your history, and how are you going to realign them? This is something that you can do on a daily basis. And this is also something that I've been thinking quite a bit about. This is actually going to be part of step eight, excuse me, just in August next, which is embedding routines in response to trauma, essentially. So when we're looking at the six buffers, sleep, nutrition, exercise, relationships, coping skills, and access to mental health, how we are embedding that in our routines matters. So, this is what I would invite for you to practice as part of a daily ethical, act aligned practice. So, check in. Let's do it right now. Feet on the floor, uncross your legs, take a sip of water if you need to. Notice any sort of somatic symptoms that you might be feeling. Okay, now we're going to move over to the next thing, meditation. We're going to realign our inner behavior with the environment around us. How can we re-engage with what we're doing right now in a way that's meaningful to us? I'm going to tell you how I typically have done CEUs that are online in the past. Pay attention, I pay attention, I pay attention. I take a few notes, I mute it, I turn off my camera, I start folding laundry, somewhat paying attention. Oh, yeah, I heard what she said there, and I really liked that. So right now I'm inviting you back in. Put the laundry away, put the treatment plan away. Just for a second, you can get back to your treatment plan. I don't care if you're multitasking. You get back to folding. It's okay. You can here in just a second. We're just realigning right now. There's nothing wrong with multitasking while you're doing a virtual CEU. We all do it. See, it's not good or bad. It's just what we've conditioned. Okay, here we are in this space together. Why did you decide to do this today? Is it because you needed an ethics CEU? Totally valid. Great. I'm glad that we could be here to give you the opportunity to get an ethics CEU today and check that checkbox. Let's be thankful for something. What are you thankful for? I'm thankful to be able to spend this hour with you, knowing that my husband right now is dealing with a 9-year-old who doesn't want to do one page of math. That's it. And my husband's doing it. And I'm thankful for that so that I can spend time doing this with you. I can also, whenever I'm finished with this, extend some compassion to my husband to say, thank you for doing this. Thank you for allowing me this time right now. And then how then does my behavior match what I value? Well, I value my family. So I will say that this month in particular, my behavior has matched my value of spending quality time with my family because I've done that. Right now, I'm not spending quality time with them. So I'm going to get back to that in a second, and that's going to be all right. We're going to get right back into it because it's a practice. It's not a stick to, but it's just a practice. What is this going to look like for me? I can walk this out in my mind. It's going to be going to my husband first, giving him a hug, checking in on him, and then saying, I'm going to go check in on our son. And I'm going to go check in on him. And you know what? I might have to practice all of this again before I talk with him because I might have an emotional reaction to the fact that he's throwing a temper tantrum over doing one page of math. But if I were to do a risk benefit analysis as a behavior analyst, you know what I could say? I could just say, just going to do an extinction burst with him, escape extinction, and that's it. Hold him through until the very end. I could do hand over hand with him. And I can rationalize in my mind how doing hand over hand compliance would be beneficial in the long run and outweigh any harm. We do that all the time, don't we? Because this takes a long time. But do you know what takes longer? Repairing a ruptured relationship. living outside of your values and then trying to get back on track, not doing these types of practices. So, just because it works efficiently and just because we've said that it's kind does not mean that it's ethical. Goes back to that morals thing. Just because it's good doesn't mean that it's not bad. Just because it's bad doesn't mean it's not ethical. Vice versa. Again, trying to take away the good and bad, black and white from it. It's different. It's a spectrum. Okay. What would this be if I didn't give you some literature? You have a few articles to download that are available on the Podia website. If for some reason you didn't get them, let me know. But I usually send them out whenever I send out the recording of the video. So hopefully I remember to do that at some point this week or next. So I encourage you to read these two articles because really what they do is talk about how we can embed ethics through what we're doing all the time by putting the learner's choices first, by putting their culture first, by designing our strategies to fit their social construct as opposed to our own, right? So, encourage you to read these two articles. They definitely align with what we've been talking about today, as well as, of course, acceptance and commitment therapy. And I say that because ACT is simply a choice procedure, right? It's a constant idea of making choices. Of you've been presented the stimulus, this emotion, and now you can make a choice. You can really dig into that emotion and you can avoid the action that might bring you closer to your values. But when you're doing that, you're also in this avoidant pattern, right? So it's important for us to recognize that we have the power to make these types of choices. Okay, so our personal bias assessment. This is our last little bit today. So I want you to take a couple of these ideas, these concepts, if you will. The first one is reflect upon your own learning history. Write this one down right now. How does this potentially differ from your learner's family? Now, I'm going to give you some examples. These are some examples that are from my own experience, not from anybody else's. So, again, y'all are fully aware now of who I am as for my history now, at least briefly. Um, I differ quite significantly from most of my families that I work with. The first families that I worked with were in Los Angeles, and I had two very different um, families that I worked with. I worked with one set of families that was in the Pacific Palisades in Los Angeles County. And then I had another set of families that I worked with. It was like Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then Tuesday, Thursday. I would work in South Central Los Angeles. I differed significantly from both of them because I was not raised in that wealthy of a family as the Pacific Palisades. I did not experience walking to class in a beachfront community where we ate lunch every single day outside, and then everybody walked home to with their nannies. That was not how I was raised. And that also significantly differed from the families that I worked with that were in South Central. So, totally opposite ends of not only Los Angeles County, but also opposite ends of my learning history scope. I was somewhere in the middle, right? But I was experiencing a learner's histories or learning histories from families who had experienced significantly different cultures and significantly different upbringings than how I was raised. So now I'm going to invite you to do that yourself. Look at what this looks like for you. What are some barriers, and you can write this down right now, what are some barriers that you may experience to being able to assess their cultural background, and how might that affect treatment planning? Well, I can tell you some things that I know, some barriers that I have experienced there are two different things that I'm going to talk about. So, before I became a mom, some of the barriers that I experienced was I didn't know what it was like to be a mom. It's a pretty common one in our field. That affected how I would go about treatment planning. And now it affects how I go about treatment planning because I project. So my go-to, right? We all do. Our go-to is projection, right? So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to project how I would treat my family or my child. I'm like, well, okay, got to recognize that that's not what we're talking about today. We're talking about this learner who, based on question number one, has a significantly different learning history than me or my child. So now I've got to go through and reassess, right? So that might be a barrier. Another barrier might be the previous supervision that you've received, and that supervisor told you weren't supposed to ask those questions, right? That's going to lead to a dual relationship. So you don't have any experience assessing for cultural background. That's a barrier, right? What are you going to do to fix that? Are you going to seek outside mentorship and practice this skill and build up this skill and then just do it? Rip that band-aid off? Yeah, maybe so. And it's always okay to ask for help, right? Seek out mentorship for this one. When's the last time that you asked what the learner's familial needs or their values are? And then have you asked how ABA can better support those needs? This is a question that we often are like, oh crap, I haven't asked that in forever. And you're like, no, but I can tell what they need. I can tell what they value. Not really. Because sometimes our verbal report and our observations don't match, right? And sometimes a family might tell you a need that you didn't realize was even there, right? Sometimes we don't recognize all of the things that we miss because we're so hell-bent on creating a behavior analytic environment. This was one that came up for me, and this goes beyond toilet training, but do you have experience with whatever procedure it might be beyond Western culture? The first time that I was doing toilet training with an Islamic child was eye-opening for me because it was not something that was a part of my learning history. So I had to ask a lot of questions of the caregiver. And usually I would be able to ask the mom in the Islamic culture what to do. But in this particular instance, the mom was not capable of providing all of that information due to her own learning history and needs. So I had to have this conversation with the dad, and it was for his daughter. And it was incredibly uncomfortable for him because of his cultural history. But I will tell you this, everything that we know of toilet training is significantly different than how that culture for that particular family wanted their child to be toilet trained. So it was a learning process, but it's not something that we talk about in our code of ethics. It's not something that we talk about in our task list. It's not something that's mentioned in any bit of toilet training literature. So what do you do? Do I berate the family and tell them, well, that's not best practice? This is what best practice is? No. I met what their needs were and adjusted, right? Because that's what needed to happen. So this is again kind of a carryover from that. Have you analyzed how the family's culture may be at odds with what we consider best practices? and beyond the code of ethics, right? Not just within our code of ethics, but also just with what is in our literature. Our literature is westernized literature. Our literature is white man's literature. They didn't ask anybody else what their thoughts were on what they considered socially valid. That's again why we have 13% approximately of research studies that are actually socially valid. So, what are you doing to change that? What are your ethical behaviors? Jot them down. Be proud of those behaviors. Are you embedding choices, which is again practicing psychological flexibility within programming? So, for example, when you're establishing their like daily routine for what you're going to do in their ABA session, how are you embedding then choices within that? One of the things that we like to do is there's just kind of an open-ended idea of how a session's supposed to start. So we start with some sort of check-in, physical activity, then maybe something that's a lesser preferred task, followed by an adult and a break that's with adult engagement, right? But then the next thing that we might do is maybe a more moderately preferred task. And I might say, what do you want to do? Because it's more of a leisure skill. Do we want to play a game or do you want to do an art project? Or we can do make some bracelets. Those are our three choices today, right? And then we can go into how else we can embed more choices and expand upon choice making procedures throughout the day. Because that's also how we're going to prevent harm because we're providing this choice making within these safe boundaries that we now know are culturally informed as well as ethically sound. Okay, y'all, we did it. I've never ended early, and we're not technically early by CEU standards. We're just early based on my standards, but we did it. So, y'all join us for step 8. Like I said, we're going to be talking a lot about trauma in step 8. This will be August 21st, which is my parents' anniversary, 6 o'clock Central Time. So, back to our regularly scheduled time, 5 o'clock Mountain Time, 7 o'clock East Coast. I hope to see y'all there. Does anybody have any questions for me before we wrap up for today? And feel free to throw them in the chat or put them, or just unmute yourself. Thanks, y'all. I appreciate y'all so much. And again, thank you again for the kind words. We really, I truly do appreciate it. I hope y'all have a wonderful end of your summer, and I hope you get to live within your values a little bit more today. All right. Have a fantastic afternoon.